almost 2 years, and it's
Yeah.
like you're saying earlier, like the domino effect ripples down, like ripples, like the currents ripple down, and you feel it, whether it's right away or the impact's a little bit takes longer to
Yeah.
get to you. It's still going to kind of shake things up a bit, right?
Yeah. It's that having an inflationary recession in particular, right? Like that is um because you have, I guess, like, to kind of backtrack a little bit. I had mentioned earlier that one of the best ways to get out of a recession is by spending more money, right?
Yeah.
When you have an inflationary
Then it
recession,
becomes a little trickier, yeah.
yeah, right? Because
Because the last thing you want to do
you,
is print more money too. Like it's just, yeah, it's this whole
mm-hmm, right? Because you
vicious
have a
cycle.
situation where you can have one of two things, right? If you want to get out of a recession, you either have to not spend any money, right? And then therefore the prices of goods can go down, but then people still have, like, obviously they're getting paid from their jobs, and there's a lot of money in the system because inflation was
Yeah.
an issue, um, from a printing of dollars standpoint. Um, so you have that scenario where it's like the supply and demand. You remove the demand, therefore the prices can kind of uh,
Rebound.
rebound accordingly, so that you can
Yeah.
start buying again. Or you have a situation where you're almost going to accept that, um, if you want to buy a liter of gas, it costs you $1.70. Or if you want to buy a can of tuna and it costs you, I don't know, $2.50, $3, right? Like,
Yeah.
which
Which,
feels astronomical.
yeah.
But if you have that situation where I'm going to actually print even more money, but putting it into um certain, um what's the word I'm trying to look for, but not industries, but like certain means of getting that money into the economy, where it's not just simply going into the stock market or going into something that's not producing anything, right?
Yeah.
Like if I give you money and it's like, this is specifically for your grocery bill, right?
Yeah. You can't guarantee
um
that that's how it's going to get spent. Yeah.
yeah, and so you could do, for instance, like tax rebates, right?
Yeah.
So if you are able to submit at the end of the year your grocery bill, and let's say it's, I don't know, $30,000, right?
Yeah.
And then the government is saying, okay, we will actually cover half of that, right? So
They
that's
can,
a way where we directly manipulated the system, where it's like, in theory, the government is kind of printing more money, but it went to kind of covering your grocery bill, right?
yeah.
You could have a scenario where, yes, the cost of goods no different than, I don't know, my dad when he was growing up. You're buying a loaf of bread for a nickel type of type of situation, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to now we spend, I don't know, you can probably spend upwards of like $7 if you really wanted to on a loaf of
Yeah.
bread, maybe even more. As
If
crazy
you
as
want
that
the
sounds,
fancy stuff, yeah, it's
yeah,
not
right.
hard. Yeah.
Not that that's the normal, but you know that
No.
that exists. Um,
Exactly.
you can start to re-justify the amount of inflation, if that makes sense, where it's not actually inflation on your wallet because you have more money. So if
It's
something
inflation in
that
the
used to cost
system. Yeah.
$5 now costs $10, but you have double the money in your pocket, well, your purchasing power does not, like, hasn't been affected.
Affected.
Yes, you're
Yeah.
putting more money down to that employer or that business, sorry.
But you
um,
should have more saved up anyways.
but
Yeah.
you still left the grocery store with the exact same amount of groceries, right?
Exactly.
So there is like kind of a weird thing with that, where you have to decide what's the way that you're going to do it. The the one scenario where you use austerity measures are, obviously, it's a lot of pain in the beginning, but the hope is that you kind of come out of it better, right?
Yeah.
Um, it's the equivalent of like, I need to lose weight, so I'm going to starve myself, right?
Yeah.
Um, so you have that scenario. But then you could also have a situation where you're going to put a lot of money into the system and hopefully be better off for it after the fact. But
Down the road.
that is ultimately super risky, right? Because if you don't do it properly, right? Like, I
Yeah.
think, I mean, I'm not trying to like, I have the great idea, but but obviously from a tax rebate standpoint, you are very specific of what you're giving that money to, right?
Yeah.
Rather than in the pandemic, when if you were off work and someone gave you $2,000, like the government gave you $2,000, you could spend that on whatever, right? Like, who's to say how much you had saved up, type of thing? Maybe you took
Yeah.
a vacation in another
Yeah.
country, or I don't know what, right? Like, um, there was no control. Ideally, it was going towards your basic necessities, right, to keep you
Yeah.
going, because it's not a lot of money. But there's nothing to say that you couldn't have had a situation. I don't know. Maybe you're living with your parents, and so that $2,000 was basically profit, right?
Yeah.
Because your job was relatively profit. Um,
Or you're paying off a loan that's separate
yeah,
to something
right. Like,
else
so
that
you could
incurred,
have
right?
different
Yeah.
scenarios, right? You could have some people that desperately needed that and they had to put that money towards like a loan or something like that. But then you have other people that a lot of the money went into the stock market, right? That's why we
Yeah.
saw crazy growths over the last
Yeah.
few years within the
Yeah,
stock
because we
market.
were joking about that the other day too, is the GameStop and like the meme
Yeah,
stocks.
yeah, meme stocks,
Yeah.
which is wild when you're like, the economy was on hold. So, like, globally. So you're telling me that we are increasing our economy in a scenario where there is no
Can't
activity happening, right?
exactly. Yeah, it's kind of
Yeah. Um and that's really what, like, the argument would be that in the situation with the pandemic, we should have gone into a recession March 2020,
20. Yeah.
right?
But they
Like,
bought
but they
yeah.
said, nope, we're going to artificially inflate, like, gotta give the economy a life raft and
Yeah.
hope the
Pretend it's
air in it,
alive. Yeah.
yeah, like, keeps us afloat long enough, even though it's like, no, we have weights on our ankles that are pulling us
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
So
It's like
we
having a kid with a dead pet that they don't realize is dead. It's
yeah, yeah, oh my gosh, that's good. But yeah, it's a good analogy, right?
thank
Like,
you, analogy. I was like,
yeah,
there's
what's
the
the
word.
word, right? Yeah. But no, that is a good analogy, and it is so important that fragility of the system, right? How you're going to approach each problem, because
Yeah.
it's not only like you have the government side of things, but you also have us as individuals.
The free market as
Um,
well. Yeah.
yeah, that free market, as private citizens trying to spend our money on the things that we want to spend it on. Well, the system is so fragile that, like, if all the pieces aren't moving in unison, like, kind of an understanding what the objective of the other is, uh, you easily can run into a situation where you
Where
have
you're
a bad situation and just make it worse,
worse. Yeah.
right?
Which I think that's a good thing to take away. It's just how fragile it is. Like you could slip from
Mhm.
like the recession into the depression very quickly.
Yeah, and because
Or just with like
that
a
that
few extra
artificial way of
factors.
propping
Yeah.
it up makes it feel like we're better than we are. But the argument is because we don't just allow ourselves to sink, right? We almost, when if you have a situation where you've lied about something,
Yeah.
but
Then you
then someone
keep
tries to
lying
catch
about
you
it.
on it, and then you
Yeah.
make another lie up to try to justify it, and then you
Exactly.
just kind of keep
And you
going with it.
end up
I
in a
feel,
web of your own bullshit. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I feel like that's what essentially what we're somewhat dealing with, where we're kind of lying to ourselves, right? Like, if you look at 2008 and we bailed out banks, well, those banks should have failed and we should have kind of crumbled as an economy and, like, learned our lesson from it, right? Like, you look at any of the scenarios, right? Like, I'm not trying to pick on that, but I think that's a very well known scenario,
Yeah.
because for the vast majority of people that are alive today, they lived through that. um so even if you were a little kid, right, you maybe knew your parents were kind of money was tight, that type of thing. um
Exactly.
but yeah, like, for quite a long time now, right, um for multitude of different reasons, right, the ending of the Glass-Steagall Act, printing of money during the pandemic, the wars, right, go through the different things that
Yeah.
affect economies.
Boomers retiring.
um
There's a lot of factors. Yeah.
yeah, right, like, we're not even going to try to go through every single thing.
Yeah. It's
Insert your answer there,
yeah.
of what different factors cause this. Um, but yeah, and I think it's very telling that we likely should be heading into an inflationary recession, because that is a situation where it's like we've overinflated the economy, and now we're going to like kind of deal with the bursting of the bubble, right? Whereas typically you might have an inflating of a certain industry
Correct. And then
that
you can
then
usually ride it
pops,
out. Yeah.
and then you're like, okay, well, farming is still okay over here, but this
You can
retail stuff
balance it
over
out.
here is not doing too well, or whatever,
Yeah.
right? Like the
You can
tech
balance it out a
industry,
little easier that way, though, where
yeah, right. As opposed to right now,
it's right across the board.
yeah,
So,
you don't have a choice no matter what it is.